Hello, welcome to another week of Public Interest Technology 502, Co-Designing the Future. I'm your instructor and learner, Katina Michael, from the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and also the School of Computing, Informatics and Decision Systems Engineering. So if you're in this course, so far so good, you sort of know what it's about. And just to reiterate, our course learning objectives for 502 is to be able to demonstrate the ability to work as a team. And that team is not necessarily a team that's within ASU alone, as in your classmates, but also within your organizations or external acquaintances in terms of community groups. It's to develop or engage in a public interest technology project using a co-design methodology. And I've spoken to quite a few of you already. You're brainstorming some great ideas. Please keep them coming. Although by week 2 now, you should know not only what your project is, but who you're going to interview. It's to design across one or more vertical applications. And for you, it could be oceans, it could be plastics, it could be e-waste, it could be save the dolphins, it could be, save the trees, whatever it is. We've spoken about it and I've given you some feedback on scope. But it's really about you choosing a project that you could carry on to your applied project, that last course that's compulsory in the public interest technology degree, and to be able to elicit and analyze end users' needs to innovate responsibly. We're at the second of 7 weeks. And this week we're calling Immerse and Align. So we've done the build the conditions, which is really context setting. It's really about the public interest technology project. And now we're going, okay, it's time for us to investigate further. Let's do a desk study. And a desk study is like a literature review or something that tells us more about the project. It could be local newspapers that you find. It could be other kinds of journal publications with, peer-reviewed weighty evidence on statistics on what's happening with our fisheries, for instance. Then we're going to go through discover, design, prototype, test and refine, and then our pitch day where we all get to share, even if that's not live. But I'd love for videos to come out. I'd love for you to participate in my public interest technology colloquium every fortnight and get engaged. I'll invite you on and you can talk about your project. Even if you haven't got into that 7th week, I'd be happy to have you prematurely as you think out aloud. Our learning outcomes for this lecture is to be able to identify the major differences between typical systems development life cycles, like the ones I grew up on, which really weren't participatory, although I must say in the late 90s, I did hear about the term participatory design, but little was really understood. And also, we're going to look at the central role of the end user in co-design. And that central role, while it's the end user that we're focused on, it doesn't mean that every other stakeholder is not around the table. And that's something that's really important to convey, that if you've got 10 seats at a table, then all of those 10 seats should be filled with different stakeholder types, with different power imbalances and dynamics. Some people you will invite and they won't actually ever turn up to collaborate, but the invitation has been sent. That's the main thing. But carefully crafted messages can ensure that members of government agencies turn up, even when it's voluntary to do so. The 4th objective of this week is for you to gain the ability to conduct a full-length interview with a primary stakeholder. And you may have several you're thinking about. Please let me know how you've prioritized the stakeholders and whether you will be doing that single interview with who and why. Share that on the community board, for instance. And to be able to write an internal review board application for a new project and lodge it successfully. Now that deliverable, although it sits in week 2, is really due by the end of the session in 7.5 weeks, now 6.5 weeks, but that's a bonus 5% result. So if you sit the city training, which I think is about 4 hours, it's not really pass fail, it's more multiple choice and the ability to redo again until you get it right. But if you can sit that and pass that and get the certification, it means then you can write an internal review board application. And what that might do is help you when it comes time to doing your applied project and wanting to publish on your research if you're thinking about a PhD down the track. You'll finish the week with being able to create what's termed an interview protocol, to be able to do a voice recording, gain consent for that and confidence, do a transcription, clean it up, and then present it back to the end user for any last amendments. And so this is where we're sitting. We've already done build the conditions. Are we the right people for this work? Is it needed? What is in it for others? Who are we working with? What matters to them and who can take part? And now we're in the should we be doing this phase? What do we already know through the desk studies, as I mentioned? Who should we partner with? These are your collaborators, and where are the gaps? And of course, this is driven by end users. And again, the next 4 parts: to discover, to design, to test and refine, implement and learn. So another sort of schematic of what is co-design. In this instance, we're seeing different types of phases. We have 6, these have 5. We've just chosen a different model. And I suggested last week that you would choose, the steps that suit your organization the most. And in this instance, we've got the discovery, the interpret, the ideation, the experiment, the evolution. Well, to be honest, these are just other words. Discovery. If I go back one, you can see that we have discovery in this phase 3. The interpretation, which is more to do with the immerse and align towards the design. The ideation phase, of course, the design, the experiment, which is the prototype, and the evolution, which is the refine and repeat kind of thing. So most of these phases are sort of similar. Choose the one that suits you the best. You can see a plethora online. I think I managed to find 14 different co-design approach phases. But really, it's all about, as Mike Stanley says, figuring out those gate processes, sticking to them and having these timelines and knowing what's required in each gate. So if you've done this project once, how would you refine it a second time? Which step did you really not think was important, or which step was missing? And then you name it and you create a cycle. I wouldn't deviate too much from the cycles as presented. Some of them have only 2 phases. Some of the more complex ones have 8 to 10, but typically you're sitting at around 6. And so the ground rules include encourage wild ideas, and wild ideas often do come from end users. Build on others' ideas, right? Stay focused on the topic, one conversation at a time. Don't talk on top of each other when you're supposed to be listening to each other. Be visual and expressive. That's why mural, canvases, brainstorming, butcher paper, all of these things would be useful. People scribing notes, and go for quantity of ideas, because then you can cull them out, or you can co-locate them and come out with those grand ideas. And defer judgment till later. You don't have to do the wiring at the beginning. Do it later. And so I like this a lot. Another depiction of the co-design approach with the project mapping, the stakeholder mapping, the voice spectrum of the stakeholders. So you can see sort of the ranges. Then engage, purpose mapping and reference guide, stakeholder engagement. Okay, again, similar terms. What is co-design? Co-design phased approach, assistance with operationalization of co-design outputs. And that's the aim for everyone really, is to operationalize, to get to these outputs from principles or ideas. How do you put them into practice? Support for recruitment process and ongoing peer mentoring support, and beginning with understanding of need. And that's often missed. We're often with co-design solving public problems. I just thought I should mention that. That's why we've married co-design with public interest technology, because these are public problems like homelessness, disability, access to services, equity issues, racial issues, issues to do with equity, issues to do with housing, issues to do with gender and gender violence, issues to do with poverty and mental health concerns. And if you go to the skills.innovation.nj.gov, which was also produced by the same individual who created this website, Solving for Public Problems, a professor from New York University from memory, this lady was able to put these modules together. And if we go through them, again, another phased approach, intro to new technologies, right? Public interest tech, innovation mindset, more like design thinking, a problem definition, a user-centered design or human-centered design, analytical thinking, the introduction of open data, collaboratives, collective intelligence. How can we pull big data together to be able to provide responses, evidence reviews, powerful partnerships, and we talked about partnerships in the second video of this lecture, and the theory of change. Let's see, that one is evaluation and evolution. And of course, if I go back here, unrelated to the slide that I just showed you from New York University, but here you go, evolution. So you can see that, and the word evaluation, right? You can see how typically, if we were to do a content analysis on these different phases, we'd come up with about 6 or 7 common ones. Now, really important after talking to each of you, I know you're at critical points in your career where you're thinking, where to next and what is in it for me? You know, I've done graduate studies. I've concentrated on a bachelor's degree. I have, you know, been in the defense force, or I have been in big corporations. I've worked for a while. But my hope was in coming into public interest technology, the degree at ASU, is that you would consider how you would define yourself. And we don't often give ourselves time to do career mapping. And I like this storyboard or vision board because it's you. It's what about you? So questions like, who are you and what do you stand for? What makes you fulfilled and happy in life? You know, the older we get, we ask ourselves these questions. And if we become more honest in answering them. So a lot of us have left careers in industry or defense or otherwise in order to do PIT, or in order to explore things that we love about biology, for example, the environment, or social justice issues. The vision board looks at what are the important aspects in your life, all the way from family to spirituality, which is often not mentioned and neglected, to health and fitness, which is becoming increasingly important as we are all bound to computers and the messaging seems to have just become more frequent. After this point, we're back to those stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Name them, typify them. Who are they? What types of stakeholders are they? And in socio-technical theory, people like Dr. Robert Abbas have defined stakeholders as operational and non-operational, and users sitting somewhere in between these. And by explaining who these stakeholders are, you know, you either can keep them satisfied because somehow you're in the information spectrum to them. You've got to keep giving them information. They're relying on you. You may actively engage them because you need something. You might keep them informed with your latest newsletters, or you might monitor these players because you're not sure if they will impact your organization in a negative way. So considerations when co-designing with and for people, and this is the lived experience of suicide, unfortunately, is to find all the relevant voices, support informed decisions, for example, readiness, create an environment to speak their truth, transparency around expectations, and support amidst potential power imbalances. So we invite people to trust us to hold them gently while they explore and share their deepest, often most painful personal experiences to bare their heart and soul. That's one organization called Roses in the Ocean, a beautiful website, I might say, dedicated to co-design. I really encourage you to go to that website. The SDG Partnership Guidebook is another sort of aspect of stakeholders. It's not just stakeholders for collaboration, but stakeholders as partners, end users as partners, users as partners. And in this instance, one of the ASU academics out of the DC office, Mahmoud Farouk, engaged Mission Publics for We the Internet. And We the Internet was an MP project and was supported by the SDG. And this is what it looks like, right? A lot of sticky notes, a lot of frameworks, right? Stencils. You won't be working in Mural Live, but people tend to scribe and to write things and to fill out cards and worksheets and to brainstorm together in a non-threatening way. This is how we have dialogue. So once we do this in pairs, perhaps we might be able to share in the middle of the table and then somebody decides to present to the group, because this is like one of perhaps 20 tables, which might mean there are 200 people there on that day or 100 people there. Of course, not while we're observing social distancing rules, but otherwise, yes, this is not an uncommon view. And this is typically how some of the panels on solar looked in DC, led by Mahmoud and the team there in the School for the Future of Innovation in CISPO, the Consortium for Science Policy Outcomes. some sticky notes here. I like this message in particular. I thought I'd share. Don't go too far down predetermined solution paths before starting. I heard somebody today that I spoke to say, I always go to tech, first off, but tech is not always the answer. Visit end users more in their environment, in situ. Go and see what it's like, right? Don't invite them to your offices. Go to theirs. Go to the client site. Go to the customer site. Incorporate in commissioning cycle prior to tender, doing surveys, ask relevant questions, be realistic with people about your scope. Ask relevant questions. That's a big thing that I talk about in part 2 of this lecture on interviews. And so these are like your mural style frameworks. And remember what I said, that print them out, write notes on them, take a photo, upload to the discussion board, and you're done. It doesn't have to be more onerous than that. But what I'd love to see is the matriculation from the handwritten notes to something that's more project-based that you can sort of circulate to other people, but that'll come in time. And in this case, we're talking about the 5 principles of co-design: outcomes focused, inclusive, adaptive, respectful, and participative. And you may have your own. I know some of you did essays for Professor Eric Fisher, and you came out with your own principles of co-design and explained them. The end user as a powerful force for creativity, never underestimate that. It's one thing to, do some observations, group activity here, using non-traditional items, and then going around the table and expressing oneself. But the end user is powerful because they think in a non-traditional way, not in a structured way. They haven't had exposure to processes before in terms of business processes and workflows, perhaps. And so you're going to get a lot of diverse feedback. And you can see like this completely spaghetti kind of loop here, and with, these 3 stations, and perhaps people go and they rotate through these stations as you have them in a town hall setting. And remember, the user is amazing. They've got fears, they've got dreams, they've got contexts, they've got motivations and imperatives, frustrations, they've had dealings with particular stakeholders before. They've got their own priorities, depending on what their circumstances are. They have their own thoughts, their original thoughts. They have relationships that influence them, attitudes that they develop over time based on behaviors and learned experience, and they're engaged in activities. But all of this provides some very interesting motivation for creativity. And you might think and come across things you've never thought about before. I'm not surprised that that would happen. Public participation is really important, all the way from informing the public to consulting with the public. And remember, consulting is not co-design. Involving the public, collaborating with the public, and finally empowering them as part of the design team. And so depending on where you're sitting in this sort of increasing impact on the decision, the user may have very little because they're just listening and absorbing the information, to being informed, right through to being empowered to be that actual instrumentation that generates the ideas and leads. And increasingly for public interest technology, we do have this notion of empowerment, because that's what is required actually, to empower the end user so that they are able to take the journey on their own. And so this is a very interesting face. It's got here seeing, saying, and hearing. And it's just a model, right? We can come up with all of these different motifs, all of these different frameworks, just by thinking about now what should be the underlying object that frames. And we're not talking theories here. End users don't care about the theories like theory X and Y. They're looking to imagine something, and social imaginaries plays a role in this instance. But as we said, there is a process. We're developing insights with people. We're synthesizing insights with people, and that might read, conducting interviews with people and then synthesizing that interview data. But we're developing a relationship and a connection. We are understanding one another. We are able to go through the journey together. We are holding each other's hands through the process because we all want it to succeed. That's when you've got the right stakeholders on board, when despite the vested interests, there's a resolution that people want to have. It's not when a major corporate player dictates the terms of the agenda, for example. That's a no-no. As a member of the Australian Privacy Foundation, quite often we were invited to user consultation with big players like Google or Facebook. Now, in the case of Google, they would hand over what they considered a user engagement, but it had nothing to do with engagement. It was more like brochureware. We've got this new technology that we're hitting the market with, look at what it can do. And we'd watch videos of, Google Glass, or we'd watch videos of Skynet, or some kind of balloon internet setup, or drone setup, as if that was supposed to bamboozle us with joy as a privacy group, non-government organization. And so it was quite weird. They would deflect real policy questions and smokescreen, thinking that they had paid for our lunch, they had paid for our transportation, in some cases brought us from interstate to engage. Allegedly, that was what they considered engagement. But a lot of NGOs will say they haven't had proper engagement. They haven't had a voice at the table, not a proper one where the power balance is there. And so they've been dictated to, this is the agenda, but the agenda has nothing to do with the agenda. And that's what you call ethics washing or smokescreen. So spreading the impact and the knowledge, laying the groundwork, understanding and leveraging systems and making it happen. The making it happen is really exciting. I actually think the making it happen is a lot to do with our prototype and the pitch. And in fact, if we decide to run, week on fortnight colloquiums where you are the star of the show, that you actually come and present your project case, even though it's not complete, and maybe bring along 5 or 6 different stakeholders to raise awareness about a topic. It could be dolphins, it could be whales, it could be deforestation, it could be homelessness. It doesn't matter what it is. We can dedicate time to that in the colloquium. And so this is like your 9 tips to innovation and co-design. And co-design is considered a very interesting tool in innovation, believe it or not. So find the link between the project or idea and the broader organizational strategy. I said that to you today, Colby. Be clear about the value your ideas holds for internal stakeholders. Consider how language, especially buzzwords, affects people's reaction. So if I say big data or AI or machine learning, it's going to imbue different things to if I say creating a database. Build an evidence base. It's important to have data to help sell your problem or solution and convince decision makers. So get those statistics available in the literature. Quantify certain things. This many whales are being caught in nets and in this location. Show a map. And so all of these things are possible. Listen to customers. Remember that co-design means empathizing and designing with employees. It may help to create a dedicated co-design space inside your office or their office. Find the believers and build a coalition. That's a big thing for you in co-design. But I'm going to advocate not just believers, because they can come from your organization. I would say from diverse industry stakeholders, government, and so forth. You will find them if you find them, in terms of looking for them carefully. And leadership of co-design makes all the difference. Find your torchbearer. Co-design requires precision in communication, in project management, and in goal setting and fulfillment. You need someone to take you through those steps and make sure you're not over budget or otherwise. And so in the co-designing process, there's a fuzzy front end, but it becomes clearer and clearer as you go through these phases towards the end of a product or process. Right until the prototype stage, you've still got this noise element happening. But as you proceed through, and right now it might look really messy to you in terms of scope and what you're going to do, but if we proceed through right to the end of prototyping and product implementation, or at least awareness and awareness raising, you'll get more and more focused towards the end of what you're supposed to do. And so we have the traditional design practices towards emerging design practices, and we're leaving like that it used to be just for products, and now we're looking at designing for a purpose, designing for experience, for emotion, for interaction, for sustainability, for serving, for transforming. All of these things are important. And going from this classical model to more, let's work together, let's share our ideas, let's brainstorm, and let's come out with things together to see this see this work. And so there are levels of creativity. I can create, I can make, I can adapt, I can do. But expressing my creativity and dreaming up a new thing is important. It provides inspiration. But if I'm doing, just solely doing and not really creating, I'm organizing my herbs and spices rather than dreaming up a new dish. So there's this level of creativity, a bit like Bloom's taxonomy, where you start with sort of, your normal run of the mill right through to, I've got this amazing magic I can weave by, using my wand, and that's my expressing my creativity rather than just getting something done. We were there years ago. It was just about getting it, just get it done. And some organizations still operate like that. Just get it done, forget about the dreaming. And so part 2 of this lecture will introduce you to interviews. So I hope you enjoyed this mini lecture on alignment. Let's go back and make sure we've covered everything. Yes. So immersing and aligning. And the second part of this lecture is on interviews and questions in the protocol and research aims, and how do you find who your key informant is for that. So thank you very much for listening, and that's the end of week 2's lecture.